On Everest, you're in a queue. On K2, you're in a lottery. One mountain is a challenge. The other is a gamble with consequences. Historically, roughly 1 in 4 K2 summits ended in a death. Compare that to Everest's 1 to 2% fatality rate. K2 kills at more than 10 times that rate. At 8,200 meters, there's a narrow couloir called the Bottleneck. Above it, millions of tons of ice. A sérac as tall as a multi-story building that can collapse without warning. No alarm, no time to run, just gravity. Dozens of climbers move through this section in slow motion, clipped to fixed ropes, each one gambling with physics they can't control. And every one of them knows they'll have to pass through here again, after the summit, when they're weaker. So why does this exact place kill so many climbers? To understand that, we need to see what makes K2 different from every other mountain on Earth. K2 sits at 8,611 meters in the Karakoram range, second highest peak on Earth. But here's what the elevation doesn't tell you. Among the world's most attempted 8,000-meter giants, K2 has one of the worst survival records. Over decades of climbing records, K2's margin for error is brutally small. Even in good seasons, the mountain punishes mistakes faster than Everest ever will. Everest has a standard route. It's long, it's high. But for experienced climbers, it's systematized. K2 has no easy route. Every single path is technical from base to summit. The Abruzzi Spur, K2's easiest route, averages 45-degree slopes the entire way up. Vertical rock walls, knife-edge ridges, ice couloirs that funnel rockfall. On Everest, you climb. On K2, you survive. Everest gives you fixed ropes everywhere, Sherpa support, established camps with supplies. Climbers rely on their own skill, carry their own gear, fix their own ropes. Everest gives you a ladder through the Khumbu icefall. K2 gives you house's chimney, a 100-foot vertical crack you climb in crampons with a pack on your back. Everest is climbed by thousands. K2 is attempted by hundreds. So why does this mountain still kill at such a high rate? K2 sits further north than Everest, directly in the jet stream's path. Weather changes in minutes, not hours. Storms don't just delay climbers, they trap them in the death zone above 8,000 meters for days. The 2008 disaster. 11 climbers died in a single day when conditions collapsed. But the mountain's fundamental nature hasn't changed. Everest is dangerous because it's crowded. K2 is dangerous because it never gives you a margin. On Everest, mistakes are delayed. On K2, they're immediate. But statistics don't kill people. Geography does. Let's look at the one spot on this mountain that acts as a physical funnel for death. Located at 8,200 meters, roughly 400 meters below the summit. A narrow, steep couloir, only 100 meters long, but climbers spend hours exposed. The real danger, a massive overhanging sérac from the eastern ice field, looms directly overhead. Séracs are house-sized glacial ice towers formed above crevasses, inherently unstable. This particular sérac weighs millions of tons and can collapse without warning. Here's the physics. Ice deforms under its own weight through a process called creep. Temperature fluctuations cause meltwater to lubricate grain boundaries, weakening the structure. Small shifts, wind, temperature swings, and constant stress can turn cracks into failure. Imagine standing under a skyscraper made of cracked glass. You can't hear the cracks, but the heat of the sun is melting the glue holding it together. That is the bottleneck at 2 p.m. The only defense is time. Move fast or don't go at all. Once collapse begins, ice. Blocks accelerate down the slope at 20 to 40 meters per second. There's no outrunning it, no shelter, just exposure. The 2008 K2 disaster. August 1st, during a crowded summit push, the sérac collapsed. Falling ice severed fixed ropes, stranding climbers above the bottleneck in the death zone. 11 climbers died, some from the ice itself, others from exposure after being trapped. Bodies were found far below the bottleneck, suggesting they fell or froze after losing the ropes. One climber, Gerard McDonald, was trying to help others tangled in the severed lines when a second sérac fall swept them all away. Modern strategy: climb through the bottleneck in the early morning, 2 to 3 a.m., when cold temperatures temporarily stabilize the ice. But this creates a new problem. Climbers move through in darkness, exhausted with reduced visibility. In 2023, Pakistani high-altitude porter Mohammed Hassan was fatally injured during the summit push near the Bottleneck. Another reminder that one slip, one hit, one collapse up here can become unrecoverable. Traffic jams in the Bottleneck compound the danger. More climbers means more time under the Serac. During the 2008 disaster, climbers waited for hours, clipped to a single line, while the Serac hung overhead. Some summited as late as 8 p.m., way past safe turnaround time. They still had to descend through the Bottleneck in complete darkness. Every extra minute here multiplies the odds. The Serac doesn't care about your summit photo. It doesn't care about your schedule. It operates on glacial physics, stress, temperature, and time. If you remember one thing about K2, remember this: you can't choose to avoid the Bottleneck. And if you summit, you face it again, on the way down. And when it goes fast. The Bottleneck has caused more K2 deaths than any other single feature. On the mountain, it's not the highest point, it's not the steepest section, but it's the place where climbers have the least control over their fate. You can be the strongest climber in the world. You can have perfect technique, flawless judgment, and ideal conditions. But if the Serac decides to collapse while you're underneath it, none of that matters. That's what makes the Bottleneck different from other dangerous sections on other mountains. The Khumbu Icefall on Everest is deadly, but it's at 5,500 meters. You're stronger there. You move faster. The Bottleneck sits at 8,200 meters, deep in the death zone, where your body is already failing. Surviving the Bottleneck gets you to the summit. But on K2, reaching the top is only half the battle. You've just stood on top of the world. Your heart is racing, your lungs are screaming, and you feel like the hard part is over. You couldn't be more wrong. Unlike most mountains, K2 kills more climbers on the way down than on the way up. Statistics: 37% of all K2 deaths occurred during descent. That's 31 of 84 deaths through 2013. Research shows 1 in 7 climbers, 13.4%, who reach the summit die on the way down. Compared to Everest, 1 in 29, 3.4% die during descent. K2's descent is 4 times deadlier. The technical difficulty doesn't ease after the summit. Same steep terrain, same narrow ridges, same exposure. But now, climbers are exhausted, oxygen deprived, and racing against darkness and weather. Every hour past turnaround turns skill into luck. Cognitive function degrades severely at extreme altitude. Studies show measurable brain changes after extreme altitude. Exposure, executive function, the ability to anticipate outcomes and adapt, becomes compromised. Memory fails. Coordination deteriorates. This isn't fatigue. This is your brain physically shutting down in the death zone. Climbers who summit late in the day face the worst conditions, descending in darkness with failing headlamps. On K2, the turnaround time isn't advice, it's life support. The Black Pyramid, a 400-meter section of steep rock, becomes nearly impossible to navigate when fatigued. House's Chimney, that 100-foot vertical crack, requires precise crampon work. Exhausted climbers struggle to execute the moves they performed flawlessly on the way up. Falls on K2's rocky terrain are often fatal. Unlike Everest's snow, there's nothing to slow you down. You hit rock, you hit ice, you tumble. The mountain's 45-degree average slope means once you start sliding, you don't stop. Rescue on K2 is nearly impossible. The steep angles and narrow ledges require 6 or more people to lower a body. Most teams don't have that capacity. Most don't have the strength left to try. The 1986 Black Summer, 13 climbers died when a storm trapped them near the summit during descent. French climbers Liliane and Maurice Berard summited together, then vanished in the storm. Liliane's body was found a month later, swept down by an avalanche. Maurice's body emerged from a glacier 12 years later, mummified, frozen in time. They died together. The mountain separated them, then returned Maurice over a decade later, as if to remind everyone what K2 does to those who challenge it. Supplemental oxygen dramatically improves survival. Among teams not using oxygen, 34.3% suffered deaths during descent. Among teams using oxygen, 0%. That's not a small difference. That's the difference between systematic failure and systematic survival. But oxygen doesn't solve the fundamental problem. Descent is a second ascent in a weaker body. You're climbing down the same technical terrain you climbed up, but now you're operating on empty. Your muscles are depleted, your judgment is impaired, your coordination is failing, and the mountain is exactly as steep, exactly as unforgiving as it was on the way up. On Everest, the descent follows established routes with fixed ropes and support. On K2, you're reversing a technical climb while your body and mind are collapsing. The summit gives a false sense of completion. You've reached the top, you've achieved the goal, but K2 doesn't care about your achievement. The mountain only begins deciding who lives once you turn around. Every step down is a step closer to safety, but every step down is also a step taken by someone weaker than the person who took that step going up. That's the trap. The descent isn't a return, it's a continuation of the same brutal test, except now you're failing the physical and mental requirements the mountain demands. But the trap isn't just physical. The mountain doesn't just break your body, it dismantles your mind. Decision-making at K2 is 80% psychological, only 20% physical. Climbers reach the summit after weeks of effort, often pushing through deteriorating conditions. Summit fever, the overwhelming drive to reach the top, overrides rational risk assessment. At 8,000 plus meters, oxygen levels drop to 1/3 of sea level. The brain receives less oxygen than it needs to function properly. Studies show climbers experience subtle cognitive impairment even without obvious symptoms. Memory fails, judgment becomes clouded, the ability to assess danger diminishes. The perceived altitude in winter can be 500 meters higher than actual elevation due to barometric pressure. This means climbers experience conditions equivalent to 9,100 meters, well into the death zone. Weather windows on K2 are scarce and unpredictable. Climbers feel pressure to push when conditions seem favorable. But favorable on K2 still means hurricane force, winds and temperatures of -45 degrees Celsius. The 1995 disaster, Allison Hargreaves summited Everest solo without oxygen earlier that year. She arrived at K2 in August, late in the season, with most teams already gone. On August 13th, she joined a small group for one final push, despite marginal weather. They summited late in the afternoon, way past safe turnaround time. A storm erupted with winds over 100 miles per hour and temperatures dropping to -40 degrees Celsius. All 6 climbers who summited that day were blown off the mountain. Hargreaves' blood-stained jacket was found tangled in rocks. She and the others simply vanished. Ask yourself, if you had spent $50,000 and 2 months of your life to get within 100 meters of your dream, would you have the clarity to turn around when the wind picked up? Most of us think we would. The data says otherwise. The psychological profile of K2 climbers. Research shows they often struggle with relationships and expressing emotions. Many feel a lack of control in their lives and seek it through extreme challenges. This isn't a character flaw. It's what extreme environments do to normal human decision-making. This personality type can lead to risk-taking behavior that ignores warning signs. The mountain becomes the place where control is possible. Except it isn't. K2 doesn't kill recklessness. It kills determination without flexibility. Successful K2 climbers maintain what one expedition called a positive vibe without placing pressure. Accepting the possibility of failure actually improves decision-making under stress. But that acceptance is hard to maintain when you've invested months of preparation, tens of thousands of dollars, and your entire identity as a climber into reaching the summit. The psychological pressure compounds the physical danger. You're not just fighting the mountain, you're fighting your own mind, which is telling you to keep going when every rational calculation says turn back. And at 8,000 meters, with your brain starved of oxygen, rational calculation becomes nearly impossible. The very conditions that demand perfect judgment are the same conditions that destroy your ability to exercise it. These factors, the bottleneck, the descent, and the psychological pressure, combine to create K2's deadly reputation. You'd think this biological reality would turn people away. Instead, it's done the opposite. In the last decade, K2 has entered a new era. K2's fatality rate has improved in recent years, Better forecasting, better gear, stronger logistics, and more fixed ropes have made some seasons look almost organized. But that headline hides what K2 really is: a mountain with a few good seasons and a long memory of bad ones. The overall record still lands in the single digits to low teens depending on how you count, and that's still wildly high for a climb that now looks, on paper, more systematized than it used to. The improvements are also uneven. Teams with deep logistics, reliable oxygen plans, spare cylinders staged high, radios that work, and a turnaround time treated like a rule buy themselves time and clarity. Underprepared teams don't just suffer more. On K2, they become the risk. Supplemental oxygen is the clearest divider. It doesn't make the terrain less steep, but it keeps the brain online longer, especially on descent, where mistakes compound. Better forecasts help too, but they create a new behavior. Everyone aims for the same narrow window. When it opens, traffic builds, delays stack up, and climbers spend extra minutes exactly where they can't afford them: under seracs, on traverses, and on fixed lines at 8,000 meters. So yes, the odds have improved, but the mechanism of failure is still the same: time, altitude, and terrain closing in at once. Remember the opening. On Everest, you're in a queue. On K2, you're in a lottery. Technology has changed the odds. Fixed ropes, supplemental oxygen, satellite weather. These innovations have dropped K2's death rate from 25% to under 10%. The lottery now favors the climber more than it did in 1986 or 2008. But here's what hasn't changed: the payout. On Everest, a mistake might cost you frostbite or a failed summit. On K2, that same mistake costs you everything. The Serac still weighs millions of tons. The descent still requires the same technical precision. Your brain still shuts down at 8,200 meters. We've reduced the randomness. We haven't reduced the consequences. Every climber who clips into the fixed rope at the Bottleneck is buying a ticket. Better gear means more winners, but the losers still lose the same way: under falling ice, on steep rock, or frozen in a storm 400 meters from safety. The lottery doesn't care how many people play. It only cares about physics. Recent seasons have seen fatality rates in the single digits to low teens, still staggeringly high by Everest standards. That's an improvement. That's also still 40 times deadlier than a queue on Everest. But there's one mountain where the lottery is even worse. A peak where most climbers don't fail near the summit, they get rejected long before they ever have a chance. That's the mountain I'm covering next. If you want to see why some peaks aren't just deadly, they're mathematically unforgiving, subscribe and join me for the next deep dive into the world's most extreme places.